Before we really go live? Yeah. That's up to you. I'm gonna go check the feed.
I just left my paper.
Oh, I'm gonna go check the feed.
So we're not live yet, right? Okay, so we should. Okay.
Yeah, so this slide's still showing if you want to have people introduce.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're not live yet, but we're going to go around the room and quickly introduce yourselves. Just your name and the organization or neighborhood that you're with. So we're going to start right here with this gentleman right here.
Right. Good morning. My name is Michael Campbell. I'm here.
Quick.
With the Tam Urban Agents Residence Coalition.
Thank you. Next.
I'm Tom Adams. I'm one of the primary One Health board members and also have another hat with Fairhaven Outreach, the homeless outreach for all of Franklin County.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Pamela Shields, the organizer and founder of the Urban Aging Residents Coalition. And thank you for that.
Thank you.
Kathleen Bailey, Chair, South Main Civic Association.
Great. We're going to introduce the speakers.
Maureen Stapleton, Celebrate One City. Tamika Kibbe, primary One Health and long-term resident of Columbus. And Mara Williams, and I'm with the North Central area.
Ivan Mores, Money American Resource Center.
Very good. Well, thank you all for introducing yourselves. And Chris, you're going to take a slide.
Okay, and I'll make sure. There we go. Put that down, put this down, and we need to make sure. Okay. Should be good. Good.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the September Quarterly Community Health Advocacy Breakfast Forum here at the Linden Library in Columbus, Ohio. First of all, I want to thank everyone for joining us live, and we've had to reduce the number of live participants so that we are socially distanced and being healthy. And I want to thank all of those that are joining us live stream so that you can be a part of today's quarterly breakfast forum. As those of you who have attended in the past understand, we do these quarterly educational seminars, but they're also hopefully resulting in some actions of individual residents, civic associations, area commissions, certainly organizations within our community, so that we can address some of these health issues in our community. Today's breakfast forum is titled Murder, Homicide, a Public Health Crisis, Pain, Pathology, and Trauma. And I think all of us are feeling that pain. All of us are experiencing some kind of trauma with all of the murders, the homicides within Columbus and Franklin County. More than 153. More than 153. Those are individual lives lost, brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, children of our community members. We all should be hurting. But when we think about the impact of all of these homicides in our community, it expands beyond just the families of the victims. It expands to all of us, because all of us are feeling pain and trauma in some kind of way. And sometimes the pain is so great that we are desensitized. So this morning we want to talk about how we as individuals can deal with the pain and the trauma, what we need to do as a community to lift up each other and to show each other that there is love and that there's better ways to resolve differences of opinion, differences of race, ethnicity, and culture, and other reasons that people are finding that they have to use deadly weapons to attack their brothers and sisters. So I want to start off first to thank the Linden Library staff for inviting us to be a part of today's breakfast forum at the library. So the library system has always had these beautiful facilities and these rooms that the community can use. And then secondly, I want to thank our caterer. As many of you know, I try and identify racial, ethnic, and women-owned businesses to support so that we can lift them up and grow those businesses as well. And then we try and highlight the assets in our community, like our libraries, so that those of you that are having meetings, that are having events, can look at these facilities, whether it's a library, whether it's a private facility to host an event, again, so we can lift up the assets in our community. So the catering today is by Simply Plated. And I don't think we have anyone with us today from Simply Plated, but keep them in mind. And they really took into consideration the health challenges today by having breakfast items that we didn't have to dip in as individuals. So I'm going to start first by introducing our first speaker. And this young woman, I'm going to call her our young woman. She is a member of the Primary One Health family. Stacy Swenson, and I'm going to give you a little bit about her background for those of you who don't know Stacy. She is the director of our behavioral health and social work at Primary One Health. We have 12 sites in our federally qualified health system located in Franklin and Pickaway counties. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree in interdisciplinary studies from Appalachian State University, a Master of Arts in Women's Studies, and a Master's in Social Work from The Ohio State University. Her passion for reducing barriers to underserved populations and increasing access to the highest quality of care for all has led her to practice as a clinical social worker, therapist, educator, administrator, and trainer, spanning more than 20 years. She specializes in behavioral health integration in the primary care setting, multidisciplinary team care, crisis intervention, suicide risk assessment, harm reduction, motivational interviewing, and trauma-focused therapies. She has been a community lecturer at the College of Social Work at The Ohio State University since 2004, where she teaches both graduate and undergraduate courses. Let's give Stacy a round of applause.
Thank you so much. You know what? Not yet. Sorry. No problem.
Let me make sure I'm centered. I can take my mask off here. Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming out this morning. And this week, as you may be aware, there were 5 shootings in a 9-hour period a few days ago. And one of the things that I noticed as I was watching it on the news is that there were a lot of questions being asked, like, what is happening? What is happening with young people is like nothing we have seen before. I heard one person say that. I heard folks asking why is this happening so much now? Where did it come from? And what can we do about it? And, I would argue that this is happening like something that's new. And that's one of the things people seem to be pretty surprised about is how did we get here? But really, when we look at where we've been, it's not too difficult to see how we got here. And I would argue that the frequency, yes, is absolutely increasing, but the answer to the question of why is actually a pretty simple one, even though the solutions will be very, very complicated, us kind of helping communities to heal. And the answer, I believe, unequivocally is trauma, that we are experiencing higher rates of trauma, but that generationally, as we go on, there's just more and more that's happening in the brain and the body with trauma. Physical, emotional, sexual abuse, neglect, family members with mental illness, family members who are incarcerated, poverty, and other forms of, I think if the ACEs research study were to be done today, they would start including racism as also one of the adverse childhood experiences. And so what we're seeing is that there is a lot of generational trauma, family trauma, community trauma, and trauma now that we know can be passed on epigenetically. So it doesn't even have to be the experience of someone to experience those symptoms. And one of the things that the adverse childhood experiences research showed us is that the more adverse childhood experiences someone has, the more likely they are to have outcomes for their mental and their physical health that are poor. When I learned about the adverse childhood experiences study, was remarkable to me that it had been around for quite a while, right? So the original research was done in the 90s. And it's, every time folks talk about it, it's like a light went on and they're seeing it for the first time. And yet we know it's been around for a while. And one of the things that it taught us is that the expression of trauma is that which we are seeing in our communities right now, that it's a symptom of our histories, and that's where we are. Some of those symptoms, and I know Dr. McIntosh is going to talk more about what that looks like in practice: hypervigilance, behavioral reactivity, desensitization, which Charlita mentioned, which has actually clinically been given a label of pathological adaptation, which I feel is a pretty stigmatizing way of saying the brain and the body and the psyche's desire to survive. And so I think we can talk about that more as we go on as well. One of the things that happens when children experience these adverse childhood experiences is that it recreates their developmental pathways, so that their neurology and their tissues in their brain and their body are completely changed. And so we see those outcomes, not just as children, but also as adults in the health effects. We see educational gaps, which we know then can, really impact graduation rates. We see difficulty with emotional regulation, which I think is some of what we're seeing around violence. Reduction in executive functioning, so that front part of the brain that helps us think logically can be significantly impaired. Reduction in grades, reduced employment, increase in substance use, and an increase in violence. And that's kind of what brings us here today to try and talk about and figure out. One of the things that we're seeing in teens and young adults more and more, as we do with all survivors of trauma, oftentimes, is that we see this sense of foreshortened future. So why do grades and graduation matter if I'm just going to be shot by 21 or 25? The future doesn't really matter. What matters is surviving and being connected to these people who are going to get my back. And so what we're seeing now is, as we go on generationally, as we're seeing this increase in frequency. But I do believe, absolutely, and I think that's why we're here, that there is hope. And that's one of the things I think we're going to talk about in a little bit, is that, where do we go from here? It can be a pretty depressing thing to think about where we are, but how do we get out of here? One of the things our society has not done well has been to deal with the violence. One of the things that we have done as a society is that we have incarcerated around it, right? We've tried to arrest around it, and we've just gotten more of what was already happening. So when we incarcerate individuals and we put them into prisons for long-term sentences, that's just giving them more trauma, right? And so they're not better equipped to deal with life on life's terms when they get out. And so since we know that 95% of incarcerated individuals will become our neighbors and our family members and our community members again, we really are not coming at this in a way that's going to improve the situation. It's just making it worse and worse. And I think that's what we're all feeling and seeing and experiencing. So I will pass it off now to Dr. Dixon, and I think Shirley is going to introduce him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stacy. And we're going to take questions at the end, so each one of our panelists can answer the questions that members of our audience here or those online that Chris will take. And first of all, I want to thank Chris Stein, who is our executive assistant, for helping to set up this event today. She's done a marvelous job, as she always does. And I'll announce a little bit later our next quarterly breakfast, because she's already registered that as well. And then I want to thank our manager of development and marketing, who has some materials here, Susan Brewer, who is in the back, and she'll be taking some photographs. And she's got some information to share with the audience about our upcoming Healthcare Justice Award event. And we have materials that you can take with you. But next, I want to introduce a former neighbor and certainly a friend, former board chair of Primary One Health, Dr. Kevin Dixon. And Dr. Dixon recently retired as the Vice President of Community and Cultural Engagement at the Alcohol, Drug, and Mental Health Board of Franklin County. After, listen to this, 34 years. Yes, that deserves a round of applause. He was responsible for developing community-based initiatives that address a wide range of behavioral health issues, including launching school-based initiatives, faith-based immigrant, refugee, and prevention programs, and other key partnerships and collaborations. In the early 90s, Dr. Dixon directed the Adam Board's Innovative Cultural Training Project, culminating in a successful series of national conferences. And if you didn't attend any of those in the 90s, you really missed out. He brought in some of the best minds around culture and diversity and race and ethnicity in the country. So we really want to thank him for that. Dr. Dixon is originally from Philadelphia, and he's a proud native of Philadelphia, where he was assistant. We've got a few in the audience here. Where he was the assistant director for Temple University's Pan-African Studies Community Education Program. While in Philadelphia, he co-hosted and produced weekend talk shows on WDAS radio for 8 years, addressing community and social issues in the tri-state area. His many interviews include filmmaker Gordon Parks, former Black Panther Bobby Seale, activist Al Sharpton, musicians Gil Scott-Heron, and I know a lot of us really loved him, Grover Washington Jr., and even Papa of Soul, James Brown. In 1986, Dixon was named team historian and reporter for paralyzed skydiver Jim McGowan's historic English Channel swim in Dover. This event was covered by news agencies worldwide, including China and the Russian TASS news agency. Dixon serves on numerous boards and advisory committees and currently teaches a graduate social work course at The Ohio State University. He and his family are members of Faith Ministries Church. Dr. Dixon.
Thank you, and excuse me taking off my mask. I want to be mindful of our health and safety. As I look around the room, I've worked with many champions. For those who aren't here, there are a lot of champions in this room here that are doing good work in our community. Ms. Bailey, who's been heading up the Northeast Area Commission. Near East Area Commission, yes, thank you. And one of her co-workers or colleagues in that commission, Ms. Cooley, passed away. So we want to give her honor because that work was really phenomenal in making sure that we had our issues addressed. Brother Michael Campbell. Yeah, I was going to say Coleman, but Campbell, native Philadelphian, doing work, took work that he was doing in Philadelphia and brought it here to Columbus. So thank you for your continued work. I've done a lot of work with Liban Beulah, who is from the Somali community. And thank you, Liban, for opening up the door for the Adamate system to be able to reach immigrants and refugees in our community. He was the poster child. They had a billboard of him up on off of the Morris Road area. And we did a video with a Somali filmmaker and a couple of his colleagues, went back to Somali from their work here. And one was the Minister of Communications for Somali, and the other one became Vice President of Puntland. So really good things happening with Liban and his work there. Also, Ms. Pam Shields, working with her over at Ohio State, we're looking at healthcare issues going on with African-American women with hypertension between the ages of 44 and 65. And you're doing great work with that and a number of other initiatives. So I just wanted to acknowledge you. And Brother Brian in the back there, thank you for hanging in there and working with us in the community. And a number of other here. And Dr. McIntosh, we really, okay, you want to see me? All right, here we go. All right, just want to say that. So, let me go ahead because I wrote notes down because, and the reason I did, because I will be here an hour rambling. So I'm going to focus on my notes. So please excuse me. I just want to make sure that we have time for everybody to answer questions. Homicide as a public health crisis addressing pain, pathology, and trauma. Paul Robeson puts this crisis into context in his words, "The battlefront is everywhere. There is no sheltered rear. That everybody must be involved in this sacred and historic struggle for liberation in ever higher forms of human life." Good morning and thank you. And thank you, Ms. Tavares, for inviting me. I am with good company today with Ms. Swenson and Dr. McIntosh, who are former colleagues of mine there at the ADAMH board. As clinicians, they have worked with individuals who have been traumatized from childhood to adult. As Ms. Swenson discussed, early childhood trauma, or what we call adverse childhood experiences, are known to have a tremendous impact on the future violence, victimization, and perpetration, and lifelong health and opportunity challenges, according to the CDC. Studies show that 30 to 50% of public school students have 3 or more adverse childhood experiences. According to Frederick Douglass, once thoroughly broken down, who is he that can repair the damage? The contemporary version of that quote from Frederick Douglass is, "It is easier to build strong children than repair broken men and women." In terms of violence and homicide, we recently heard, and Stacy indicated, 35 deaths so far this year from those under the age of 21, with 13 of those below the age of 18. 153 homicides as of yesterday, as Stacy shared with us earlier, 5 shootings in the past couple of days with 4 ending in death. 70 of the 153 deaths were between the ages of 18 and 30. 18 and 30. I am always of the belief that hurt people hurt people. Time and time again, we learn that those who commit horrible crimes had troubled pasts. In order to address murder and homicide that keeps keeps increasing, some of us say we need more guns. Keep in mind, you can only use one gun at a time. In the United States, there are enough guns for every man, woman, and child to own a gun and still have 67 million guns left over. That is 120 guns for every 100 residents. So clearly, more guns is not the answer. Multiple studies debunk arguments that guns will be used to prevent or combat violence, which is rare. That's only 1% of how guns are currently used. Oppressive systems, structures, institutions are adversely impacting communities. Are we surprised by the outcome? We must find ways to improve the conditions of everyone, or the least of these, to raise the entire whole. You can always change the laws, but if the behaviors and attitudes do not change, then are we truly improving the condition? Kate Burdian scholar Almacar Cabral states this: the struggle is a long and difficult one. Therefore, we shall mask no difficulties, tell no lies, and claim no easy victories. When it comes to African Americans, we must be mindful that racial hegemony plays a large part in what occurs. From the time of enslavement and the horrors where families were torn apart, violence inflicted on those enslaved, with others forced to watch as a lesson, culture and language eradicated, and forced to work 400 years as free labor. We cannot overlook the impact that the past, present racism and other forms of hegemony has had on marginalized communities, whether it's healthcare, around implicit bias in healthcare, criminal justice reform, education. Black males are expelled 3 times higher than whites. Black children are expelled at pre-K more than any other area in school, going back to the pipeline to prison. The jobs and economy, safe housing, reimagining police services, or I should say peace services, building trust with the community. That's what needs to happen. The Chinese state, when there is trust, no proof is necessary. When there is none, no proof is possible. Prior to sharing what we do as citizens, we must be mindful of America's infatuation for violence, anger, power, dominance, superiority, and control. Violence-filled video games. MME, if you just turn on that, kickboxing, beating people unconscious and into submission on blood-splattered canvases. We cheer. Violence on television, primetime shows, every time you turn, ABC, NBC, CBS, all of them, you'll see crime shows. You turn to any station, you see dead bodies. We are normalizing violence, socialization. When we learn ways to resolve conflict, it's through hitting, yelling, pushing. Just look at reality TV, shooting. Reality TV, we're supposed to be doing good and helping each other on the same team, and we're fighting each other. Can you imagine how children are being fueled by what they see? Just look at the behavior at school board meetings. Focusing on the African American community, Black youth are being socialized by music, movies, and a well-orchestrated marketing strategy. I watched the transformation of how music in the 70s and 80s, songs of love, protest, and inspiration. In my Philly talk radio days, I played Earth, Wind, and Fire, Keep Your Head to the Sky, Teddy Pendergrass, Wake Up Everybody. Even Teddy's Turn Off the Lights, but he was at least showing love and kindness to the women, and showing respect to them. James Brown, Say It Loud. I'd rather stand upon my feet than keep living on my knees. Stevie Wonder's Love's in Need of Love Today. And Marvin Gaye, Save the Children. What's going on? Mercy, mercy me. We have spiraled out of control to a form of music or form of music venom that calls our women B's and H's. And the verbal violence is absolutely shocking. It is a form of internalized oppression, menticide, and self-hate that has no boundaries. The Procrustean methods used by these money-making entities are destroying our youth. We are too tolerant of vile and misogynistic music, how we resolve conflicts by smoking those we do not like. Media highlights what entertainers do and say is factual. The media no longer seeks answers from Black scholars, Black experts, those who know, but they go to the Jay-Z's and the Charles Barkleys and the Snoop Dogg's and the comedians for information and informing the Black community. Thank you, sorry. We must understand how the socialization process works. Author Malcolm Gladwell calls it priming. What are some of the strategies and solutions? What troubles me the most with officials and those who are responsible is that they always ask, we need your help. We need people to step forward and identify suspects. This is postvention. We need prevention, early intervention, upstream, not when the yellow tape is hung. That's too late. We need to go upstream and find out if someone's floating down the stream, we're seeing dead bodies, we're pulling them out of the stream. We're not going to stay there and continue to pull them out. We're going to swim upstream and find out who in the hell's throwing them in.
That's right.
What we have learned is that protective factors are more predictive on outcomes for our youth than risk factors. We understand that we must create programs and services for our youth to help them understand how to self-regulate and build protective factors within our community. Just to give you an example, a couple of protective families, they have both family and individual ones, but here are some of the individual protective factors that can happen within family and not necessarily community. Families who create safe, stable, and nurturing relationships. Children who have positive friendships and peer networks. Children who have caring adults outside the family who serves as mentors and role models. For example, Community for New Direction. John Dawson is a perfect example. They teach those kids how to love each other, how to work with each other. And when kids get dysregulated, they make sure that they have the appropriate kinds of interventions with those young people. That program is doing exceptionally well. And I'll share some of those other programs toward the end when we finish taking some questions. There's a Chinese proverb that says, when the itch is inside the boot, scratching outside provides little consolation. We've got to dig deep structure. We've got to look inside ourselves. There is a myth, or there's a lot of youth programs that we offer with some of the protective factors, and I'll share some of those, but then I'm going to have some other examples later on. Examples of the programs that provide those protective factors. Community for New Direction, we talked about that. There's summer camp and after school programs, keeping young people engaged, working with them with homework, and feeding our young people. Direction for Youth and Family, the Ohio Avenue Youth Center. They do wonderful things. They bring the kids in, they have art, they have music, self-regulating activities, drumming, dancing, all of that helps to settle the brain down and helps to be so that you can open up to the frontal cortex so you can think more rationally. Otherwise, you stay back in that fight flight center and always ready to pop off. Even if I'm giving you a compliment, how you looking nice today, Dr. McIntosh. And Dr. McIntosh is dysregulated. She's going to say, what you talking about me for? As opposed to say, well, thank you. And these kids can't control that. It's built in the structure. OSU Life Sports. It's a program that brings you young people over to the Ohio State University, and they spend the entire 4-week summer camp working and playing in sports that are non-traditional. Everything from learning how to swim, to soccer, to tennis, and other kinds of activities. But they also do information around social emotional learning and self-regulation. So these kids have chalk talk sessions. When we disagree with somebody, how do we sit down and work out our solutions? How do we work with one another to resolve conflict and resolve problems as an individual, but also as part of a team? And when the kids are really not doing well, and we had one young person who actually witnessed their mother murdering somebody the night before and was in the program that next day. Totally dysregulated, can't think, totally just out of sorts. They ended up having to do a transport over to Nationwide Children's Behavioral Hospital to be able to work with that child on the spot. And that's why we needed those social workers. The Paragon Project is another thing. And these are mainly funded through Adam H. But the Paragon Project, young people over at Fort Hays putting together music tapes about their lives, whether it's parent abandonment, depression, anxiety, and getting some supports while they're doing that. But at the same time, they're publishing a CD that they can share with others. And they've been doing well over there with Dr. Anderson. And they went to Philadelphia a couple of years ago and spent a day with the Roots because they had a connection there, learning from the masters and teaching them how to be better musicians, but also to be better human beings on the planet. Faith-based, we do a lot of faith-based summer camp programs, freedom schools, things that teach kids how to read, how to stay active academically in the summer, but also how to have fun and safe play. And programs like Rise Sister Rise, and many of us heard of Rise Sister Rise. But field trips to the zoo, museums, coast, like getting kids out of the neighborhood. We met with a group of pastors who said that so many young people on the West Side have to sit and watch TV as part of their summer vacation experience, but they have to sit below the windowsill so when the gunfire goes off, bullets won't hit them. This is what we are putting our kids through, and we have to do better. We'll talk about some other solutions later, but thank you so much, and sorry for taking too much time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dixon, and thank you for sharing some solutions, some programs that work. That really helps all of us. Our next speaker, and before I introduce our next speaker, I do want to note that we have a couple of other board members from Primary One Health here. We have Dr. Mary Bynum, who is a faculty lead, a part of the administration at Franklin University. And then we also have David Sanchez, who is a new board member of Primary One Health, who is also here with us today. So welcome and thank you all for being a part of Primary One Health and helping us to lift up these quarterly community health forums to educate and stimulate discussion and resolution in our community. Next, I have the honor of introducing Dr. Sarah McIntosh, who is a practicing administrative psychiatrist and addiction medicine specialist. She graduated from Yale University, New Haven, Connecticut, the Ohio State College of Medicine, and the Ohio State University Hospital's Department of Psychiatry residency program in Columbus, Ohio. She is double board certified by the American Board of Preventive Medicine, Addiction Specialty, and the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. Dr. McIntosh is the Chief Clinical Officer at the Fairfield Adam Board in Lancaster, Ohio, and Medical Director at Alvis Inc., one of our partners. She has served as medical director at 4 Central Ohio Community Mental Health and Recovery Centers, including Southeast Inc., Mary Haven Inc., New Horizons Youth and Family Counseling Center in Lancaster, and Columbus Area Mental Health Center from 1991 to 2021. Sarah is a member of Second Baptist Church, and I see another Second Baptist Church, former state senator and publisher of the Columbus Dayton African American News Journal, Ray Miller back there. She serves in missions, Sunday school teaching, and liturgical dancing. You might want to have her do some. Originally from Dayton, Ohio. Originally from Dayton, Ohio, she and her husband are the proud parents of 3 adult children. She loves traveling. I join you there. Fitness, bidwest. Oh, I join you there as well. And time with family and friends. Let's give her a round of applause, Dr. Sarah McIntosh.
Thank you so much. And good morning to everyone. Good morning. Can I remove this? No. Okay, so we had just some awesome comments and revelations, I will have to say, from both Stacy and from Dr. Dixon. And what I'm going to do is a little bit different today in these few minutes. I want to just talk a little bit about stats. Psychiatrically, when you do kind of psychiatric autopsies after a person has either died or after a person has, I don't like the term fail, but has had to go into incarceration, we look backwards and say, what could have been different? So we were given all kinds of excellent opportunities for how to prevent, right, childhood. But we're going to go backwards. Once the issue has occurred, once the crime has occurred, what do we do? Because that's what we often are left with. So about 10% of those convicted of homicide have schizophrenia, bipolar, or a delusional disorder. And that's a psychosis, where a mismatch with reality at some point. 33% that are convicted of homicide and mass murders have schizophrenia or bipolar. About 80% have a history of psychiatric treatment, but have not received treatment at the time of a crime. Individuals with mental illness, when appropriately treated, do not pose any increased risk of violence over the general population. So you'll often hear if you got schizophrenia, people are scared and you're going to be more violent. If you're properly treated, there is no higher risk than the general population. 85% of the prison population has an active substance use disorder or were incarcerated for a crime involving drugs or drug use. The breakdown is about 65% of the US prison population has an active substance use disorder. The other 20% did not meet official criteria by kind of the psychiatric Bible, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, but they were under the influence of drugs or alcohol at the time of their crime. So treatment while in jail or prison is critical to reducing overall crime and other drug-related societal burdens, such as lost job productivity, family disintegration, and a continual return to jail or prison, which is the term recidivism, which you will often hear, and programs are aimed at helping that. Inadequate treatment while incarcerated also contributes to overdoses and deaths when inmates leave the prison system. Treatment during and after incarceration is effective and should include comprehensive care, including medication, behavioral type therapies, job and housing opportunities, vocational training, etc. So despite the cost that's often associated with treatment in the criminal justice system, it is far less than the cost of society not treating individuals in this situation. PTSD, I just want to talk briefly about that. Stacy alluded to that and said I was going to talk about it, so I felt the need to talk about it. But roughly as many as 20% of people who are in prison have some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder. We immediately go to veterans or think of the trauma of war. But PTSD is a mental condition that develops following a traumatic event characterized by intrusive thoughts about the incident, recurrent distress or anxiety, flashback, and avoidance of similar situations. The symptoms are reliving, and this comes in the form of flashbacks, hallucinations, nightmares of the incident, avoidance, avoiding people, places, things, or memories that remind you of the trauma, excessive arousal, increased alertness, anger, fits of rage, irritability, hatred, etc. And these can affect young children in a different way. They don't often have that very clear and crisp set of symptoms that an adult might have. So again, post-traumatic stress disorder, that's acute distress disorder when Dr. Dixon talked about the person who came to summer camp and the night before had witnessed a murder. And it doesn't even have to be that extreme. Put yourself in your worst scenario that you've even endured in your life that may pale in comparison to some of the crises. So we often kind of minimize our own stressors. Well, gosh, I didn't do that. I didn't see my mom killed, things of that sort. But we all have our own skeletons in the closet or issues that can arise out of nowhere that can affect our temperaments and how we respond, impulses, decrease control in situations. So I did want to talk just a little bit about PTSD because so many of us experience that. And then at the COVID, a lot of people are experiencing anxiety that we can't even really describe right now. It's not in the DSM-5, just from various experiences, whether you've had the illness, whether you're getting depressed or going loony from being locked up in your house and washing clothes too much. That's a personal testimony. I had to get out of the house. I was washing entirely too many clothes that were not full loads because I just had to do something other than like sit in front of Zooms and telemedicine. Okay, I'll leave that alone. We don't have long enough time for my issues. So what I want to talk about briefly is evidence-based programming. And that's when we talk about treatment. Once it's been identified that this is the individual, the person who has murdered or the person who is in need of help, then it is time for us to look at what kind of treatment and what kind of programming. So prevention research talks about resiliency and critical thinking skills. I'm going to talk a little bit now about Alvis. I'm the medical director over at Alvis. It is a wonderful program. Our CEO is Denise Robinson. She is a visionary and has turned the organization with the help of her team from being mostly correctional based, halfway houses, decreasing recidivism by bringing folks out of incarceration and helping them to matriculate successfully into society. But there's now a behavioral health piece. There's a psychiatric piece. I'm the medical director over there. That's new just over the last 3 years. So I'm going to use Alvis as an example of just talking about the spectrum of treatment that is necessary once a person has been identified as either suffering from the trauma. Dr. Dixon also talked about hurt people hurt people. We've heard that from Joyce Meyer and everybody because it's just a reality. It is a fact. So the spectrum of Alvis programming is corrections and reentry. There's also specialized treatment for women and children and family, medication, intensive outpatient treatment, therapy that addresses the root causes of addiction, and treatment for mental health disorders. Now, I would be remiss to stand up here and not talk about how wonderful Primary One is, although I'm not an employee there, but certainly the CEO, Charlita Tavares, and her team have done just wonderful work, and I won't even say what all they do, but they are also another good resource, as well as the community mental health centers and whatnot throughout Franklin County. So the thing that I will go to briefly now is just to talk a little bit about, we've heard about risk factors. I want to talk about resilience and things like a resilient temperament, positive social orientation, enjoy social interactions, elicit positive attention from others, positive relationships, mentoring. These are important in the resilience factors that we are going to use in treatment. Because the person who often has gone so far as to commit a murder or a homicide almost has to be reparented, has to go through a rethinking process. So these are some of the things that we often attach would do this in the youth programs and the student programs. These are done in the programs to help individuals get to the root cause of their aggression, their violence, their tendency to, you look at me and you better not look at me too long. You know, all those different things that have been distorted. And I'm going to use just a quick example. Our society, we live in America, we live in a wonderful country, period. There are some things, though, that are happening that we don't even realize that are subtle. The progressive commercials, you know, they had Flo, and now they have the man who teaches you not to become your parent. Okay, so they're funny and we laugh, but let's think about that. The progressive ad is teaching this generation that one of the factors that we know is positive in resilience is mentoring, right? It's having an adult in your life who helps you to build skills and says you're worthwhile, I value you, because those are internalized. So that's something that typically is handed on from generation to generation over the process of parenting or family, an aunt, a mentor at a summer camp, somebody at a church group, a neighbor. Think of all those ways. Well, what is our generation being taught is you don't want to become your parent. So they're being taught things like when you're sitting at a restaurant, again, just think of the subtle things that are being laughed at and accepted by the next generation that we got to just kind of figure a way to make a comment on. There's one scenario, they're at a restaurant and the table and the fellow is telling them, you don't need, the waiter doesn't need to know your name. Okay, these are social interactive skills that help you to elicit positive attention from others. These are things that help you get a job, that help you interact with other people on a job, as opposed to so much of what is done now is let me look online and see how I'm supposed to react in this scenario. So the mentor has become my network of peers. And there's certainly some wonderful peers at 21, 16, and 14, but they don't have the wisdom of your parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles who have been there. So every generation thinks your parents don't know anything. I mean, that's not new, right? We all went through a phase but we were respectful. We didn't let them know it. You know, I can remember walking up the steps mumbling something about my mother, but if she had heard me, I would not be standing here today. But it is now okay to say, maybe hear what you say, but okay, and then see what my peer says about it or how I'm supposed to respond. So I did just want to comment. Those are little things that I don't know how we attack as a society, but they're slow. They're just like alcohol commercials. The only way to have fun is to have alcohol. That's ingrained. So there's a generation that's coming up that is just like, has no clue that you can have fun without alcohol, right? It's everywhere. So I'm not sure that's a concept that we need to investigate. So these strategies need to focus on strengthening these protective factors. There's certainly family positive protective factors. One thing, an emotionally supportive milieu. This includes an adult's attention to interest, orderly and structured relationships with the person. Again, you think of these parent-child, but when you're dealing with an adult who has traumatized and has violent aggression / murder in their history, they have to learn these skills all over. So I'll go on and summarize treatment works. Going back to talk a little bit more just about Alvis and the treatment. When an individual is in need of help, you want to get them to, whether it's online, whether it's a phone conversation, to the places that can help them. And it is there that they will be assessed, have an intake, and then it be determined if they can focus in the level of care best suited for their illness or their what's identified as their problems that are going to be worked on. So I think I will stop there. I was going to just leave you a telephone number, Alvis 614-252-8402. That's 614-252-8402. And there is also 614-252-8834. 252-8834. Extension 232. And that's just the two outpatients. One is women's programming, the Amethyst. Everyone's heard of Amethyst, how wonderful they are. That is a part of Alvis now. And then there's the co-ed forum on other areas. And Alvis is in Columbus, Toledo, Lima, Chillicothe, and also in Dayton. Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to ask Dr. McIntosh and Dr. Dixon and Stacy Swenson if you all would come up here, because we're going to start with some questions, and I would like you to address the response right here at the camera so that our viewing audience can hear the question as well as hear the answer. So if you all would move up this way. And Chris, do we have any online before I open up to our audience?
Not yet.
Thank you very much. So with that, I'm going to ask if there are any questions from the audience, and I'll call on you. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Yes, I'm thinking of a couple of situations where people were killed by the police. They were having what I would consider a psychotic episode. I think the young lady had that wielding a knife, and there was another man, he was going off. But the families seem to be their only resource is to call police. And the police are trained that if there's a situation and somebody's threatening your life with a weapon and won't put it down, they're trained to kill. What can be done with that? Is there any way, are we doing anything working with the police that just like they have access to call somebody if they think it's a psychotic, and it's not just somebody trying to rob you, it's somebody who's going off. Do they have any resources when that situation comes? Can they pick up? Can they call? Say, we need you out here. Do they have something like that?
And if you would come to the microphone and kind of restate the question. Thank you.
So the question is a wonderful one about, oftentimes when a family is in the midst of a psychiatric crisis, the only thing they know to do is call 911. Everybody's afraid, they're not sure what's happening. And so what resources do police officers have, if I'm hearing your question correctly. And what could we do to improve that piece of the process, which isn't really what you asked, but that's always that's one of the things I want to talk about. So in Columbus, we do have a crisis intervention training for officers. And so one of the things that families can do if they feel like they need to call 911, depending on the severity of the incident, is that they can ask that a crisis intervention trained officers come to the scene and let them know that there is someone with a mental illness on site. A lot of folks do not want to call the police because we know that it increases the risk of a terrible tragedy and outcome. Net care can be called and there can be probates done through net care if there are concerns, and that gets handled in a little bit of a different way. There is really new programming that has come out that is linking social workers that are going out with police officers and with firefighters to try to manage some of that. One of the programs that we are connected with at Primary One Health is called the REACT Team, which targets individuals and families after a near fatal overdose death that goes out to the home, and it involves a medic, a social worker or nurse, and a plainclothes police officer to bring resources and just make that connection and see if they're interested in treatment. That's a wonderful program. I would love to see it more generalized for mental health. So right now, if there's mental health and also substance use disorder, or they come across some type of mental health condition, absolutely, they jump in and they start to link with resources right there in the community. But I would love to see mobile teams that are just, if there's not a substance use disorder or there hasn't been an overdose, that they still can go ahead and work with that.
The police understand it, because the average family may not know
all of this. Yes, absolutely.
So you're saying that there are programs, there's training where the police can say, hey, we think this is a mental crisis.
Yes.
And they know all these different places.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And again, some of these programs are new. Sometimes it depends on who you get on the phone and what else is going on in the community that day. But it is something that I see our community and safety kind of moving in that direction. Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone else? Yes, Dr.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. Yeah, the CIT training, I know we spend 40 hours over at the academy. But one thing, for full transparency, is that they stopped the cultural component. We had people like Liban Beulah as a part of that. Susie Shipley was a part of it. Buwan Pikerow was a part of it. Dr. Cora Munoz was a part of it, and James Alexander. But they felt so uncomfortable about having to be responsive for the cultural community, particularly African Americans. When they found opportunity, said, well, making our officers feel uncomfortable. You're paid to feel uncomfortable. We can't allow this to continue to happen. So just for full transparency, we need to get it back into the academy, that they're looking at the cultural components of working with populations. It's different. You come in with a different mindset if you see an African-American male versus maybe a white female standing there. They're going to approach those situations very differently. So just to make sure that we are on top of it and we're aware of that. I just want to add that.
Thank you, Dr. Bynum. I think you had a question.
Yes, just really curious. I believe Dr. Dixon, I heard you say that we currently have 150 homicides here. And Ms. Stacy, I believe I heard you say that trauma is at the core of that problem, and that we've also seen a heighten of violence on some. But what now, specifically in our society, is perpetuating this increase in violence? Is there something other than trauma, other than violence, TV, that's causing our current state of affairs with an uptick in the number of homicides that we're seeing? Has something else changed in the environment that we should be aware of?
And please restate the question. I'm afraid that the viewing audience can't.
Sure, sure. Again, a wonderful question. Kind of acknowledging that trauma is underlying some of this, but the question is, what else? What else might be going on that could be propelling it? I absolutely think that, you know, the tension that's happening, and also during the pandemic, I think everyone is a little bit traumatized depending on where they sit in terms of privilege and poverty, those kinds of things. So I definitely think that there are more complicated components that come into it. But I still believe that it's about the brain and what is happening and how that's being acted out and how folks are trying to survive. Dr. Dixon, you had.
Just to add to that, it's the fear of losing something. You're not measuring up to the standards. You're not number one. You're number two. You're the haves and the have-mores. Those are the kinds of things that I really think people are vulnerable, feeling that they're not adequate enough, and it really strikes a chord with them. So I lash out when I'm not settled in how I function and live in society. And I just think that the environment, the water now is much different. The love and the support and the otherness that we have to work with is not there anymore. It's about self-interest versus collective interest. We used to care about community. Community was the neighbor next door who would come over and tell your parents that you're acting up. And my mother would say, hey, why didn't they beat you? Not the right thing or timeout, whatever it is. But we've lost that sense of community, the sense of culture and understanding. And it's this competition that is really driving a lot of us to say it's either me or nobody. And is creating a very negative environment. Plus, what Stacy mentioned is just this negative environment that continues to be fueled publicly on television. So the mediums are showing all these spats. And I just think that reinforces for our young people who see that every day, is that I resolve conflicts by yelling, by screaming, by kicking, by acting out. We've got to change that narrative. We've got to hold media accountable. We got to write letters like we used to when we see things we don't like, when they show images that are inappropriate. I write all the time. I send stuff, I'll send it right to the newsroom. They all have an email and saying, well, what about this? Why are you only featuring African-American males getting arrested when the majority of the people that are arrested are not necessarily African-American males, but you show them, that's all you show, So we got a lot of work to do, and it's not either or, it's both and construct.
Okay. Yes. The organization that we started came on the heels of the pandemic, and it's to lift up the voice of the remnant of elders and older adults, particularly in the urban community. So safety has been a major concern. And back in June, we had Councilman Reedy and Officer Scott, I believe it's today, on the care team. They came. But when you see things like what just recently happened on the Cola bus, where a passenger just clearly hits and beats and robs the 68-year-old lady for no apparent reason. My question is, what part of that behavior ties into the trauma that may be associated with childhood that might be connected, I don't know, to grandparents or older people, or maybe you get a hood from somebody that was open. I don't know.
Thank you, Ms.
What can be done? How can we address that? Because that becomes a real concern as we move around in our community in the urban areas. Our safety is really being threatened.
Thank you, Ms. Shields. Who wants to take that question?
I'm gonna let them finish.
Come on, Kevin.
No, we used to have rites of passage programs for our young people, respecting elders. Even within the Somali community, we're seeing that change where the young Somalis are robbing the elders of the community. And we're losing that because it's become this very individualistic society. But you're talking about collectivist societies, that where we used to live in the village and we work collaboratively. Now it's all about self-interest, and it just gets reinforced every single time. It's about me and not we. And when you look at it from a perspective of axiology and epistemology, of logic and process, there are cultural differences that are really grounded in who we, from our eldership. We've lost that. I think we've lost that. Faith used to be a major part in the African American community, going to church on Sunday, going up to Second Baptist Church on Sunday, or Faith Ministries on Sunday. What's your church, Charlene?
Mine is Christ Memorial.
Christ Memorial on Sunday. But our young people aren't taught values. We've lost that. Think about the Ma'at: truth, justice, righteousness, harmony, order, balance, and reciprocity. Those are sacred tenets that the Ma'at and the ancient Egyptians taught, predates the Bible. Or, when you look at the Nguza Saba, collective work and responsibility. These are the kinds of things we need to reinstill in our community in order to get back to that. But we've lost that, and it should be taught in the schools as well. In fact, my recommendation is at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, we need time cut out for self-regulation. Because if we can get the kids settled down throughout that day, they said more academics is not the answer. And we continue to try to pour more of it, but their brain's not opened up back here. To get to the rational cortex up here, we've got to be able to settle them down. Music, drumming, art. What happens? Jim, they took them all out of the schools, or limited what they could do. We'd rather have more of that in there, and the little bit of time they do with academics, they're going to be far more acceptance into that frontal cortex, and as opposed to not doing anything to help self-regulate. Mindfulness, breathing in the morning, then your academics, and at the end of the day, and then you go home at a sense of peace.
Great idea. Stacy, did you want to share anything?
Okay.
Okay, we're going to take a question over here.
Yeah, Dr. Dixon, so two things. Number one, culturally competent trauma training, because I hear the ACEs. Dr. Boyd Williams did when he come here, he did the urban ACEs study. So when I think about the violence, 150 murders, etc., when we talk specifically, can you, talk about the importance of, again, the trauma training from a culturally competent standpoint, and then secondly, senior mentorship, because you just talked about children not having, or young adults not having value systems passed down. I think there is an opportunity for senior mentorship, because mentorship, you hear today, peer on peer, youth on youth. And they're really kind of, and I'm not criticizing them, but they're not learning maybe things that, an opportunity that a senior or an elder could give them as well.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon. Come right back on up.
The cultural component in a lot of this body of work that's being administered within our communities is very critical. And I know the Association of Black Psychologists is creating something called the Emotion Emancipation Circles as a national movement to be able to work with young people and others that can be mentors and go out to the community. We don't have enough people of various cultures going into the schools. So we could see the retired postal worker or see the retired airline pilot. There used to be a brother who used to go into the schools, say, you know what? Yeah, it's hard work, but you can do it. And give the kids reinforcement and get them to see something other than what they see around them on a day-to-day basis. They've got to be able to see and what we call possibilize their future. Now they can envision themselves being a college professor, being CEO of Primary One Health, being a state senator, Senator Miller back there, being a newspaper publisher, that they can start seeing this on a regular basis, leading the Near East Area Commission. And they can see folks like that every single day. And everybody in this room has that gift. And our young people have to understand that. But when they just see negative images, and you can't dismiss what you see on television every day because it's always negative. You hear it in the music. I tend not to, but I have read satellite. I listen to some of this stuff and it's nonsensical. It's calling each other names. It's talking about putting people to sleep. It's talking all this craziness that's out there. And it's just we got to bring it to a stop. We really got to, but we can't just say stop. We've got to have something in place. And we've got to get better at coordinating with each other to start putting things in place so our young people can see that there's some structure, some organization. You know, we need to open up some of our faith-based institutions. We have summer camp programs there. We have faith leaders. We have protective adults that are in there to help provide perspective. We fund Family Missionary Baptist Church. We started a parenting program, not because, you know, and we also have a summer camp program, but the parents weren't able to work with the school systems when their kids got into trouble. So Pastor Lamar goes and represents the parents as their guide in there and helps them navigate the problems that the kids are having. Because the first thing that happens, if you tell me, how can you expel a pre-K? You can't work with a pre-K, and you've been trained by some of the best schools in this country, and you got to expel a pre-K person or a kindergarten. That's where we see it. You know, and you know what happens before the third grade. If you start to doubt yourself, you know the problems that are going to come later, you know, and that's that pipeline to prison. So we've got to find ways to re-engage our culture again and be proud of it, you know. And I'm not just talking about African-American, I'm talking about Asian American, I'm talking about Appalachian American, all of us, you know, and we've got to show our kids how to behave in proper conduct. What we're doing these days and what we see on TV is not what our young people need to be seeing. Amen.
Ms. Bailey. Oh, wait a minute. Before Ms. Bailey, let's go with Ms. Stapleton, Maureen Stapleton.
You mentioned a concept, emotional circle.
Emotional Emancipation Circle. That's by the National Association of Black Psychologists. They created that.
Okay. Ms. Bailey, you had a question.
I honestly, I hold the social work industry, or I kind of hold them responsible for some part of the family breakup. Now, you mentioned when we were growing up, not only did your parents get the correct you, the neighborhood grandmother, all that kind of stuff. And I think what has happened, what I've seen is in the social work world, a lot of them cannot distinguish child abuse versus child correction. Now, a friend of mine, there are two instances where that happened. A friend of mine, and I know this woman, I grew up with her. I mean, she's not a violent person. And she said she was in the doctor's office, her little boys were just carrying her, screaming, hollering, kicking stuff. So she took them out of the car, she spanked them both in their rear ends and said, "Get in here, that's not acceptable." Well, somebody called and she went to the court. And situations like that, and you have to talk to a child. Well, you can only talk so much. And we all got a bit, and that's what they said, that's what your parents were. I can understand burning somebody with an iron, burning their, sticking their hands in boiling water. That's clear abuse. But I think some of these social workers can't tell the difference. And you cannot remove a parent's authority and then wonder why the kid. And another friend of mine, she was getting on him about something he did. He goes upstairs and calls 911. Yeah. The police show up at the door. And I know her too. She's a responsible woman, ran her kid's body. So there's a cultural slippage in the social work world where some, I don't believe in hitting. I don't hurt a child, but sometimes I saw a little mama cat. She had 3 kids. I watched her from the window, and she was going somewhere. One little kid kept going that way, and I observed that she went meow. So he kept going. She went meow, and I'm not going. She said meow. Here time she went, and he got in line. So, and I watched this from my window. I couldn't believe it. So I'm saying, as from a cultural standpoint, if you're going to throw parents in court because they try to correct their child, and then you want to know why the kids, she got him. After the police left, she's still with it. But I mean, we have to understand, if you want a family to be a family, you have to let the family have the responsibility. And I'd like to see some changes in some of the social work programs where they learn these cultural differences between abusing a child and correcting.
Stacy, I think that kind of comes to your profession. So I don't expect you to stand up for all social workers, but to talk about the changes in the social work philosophy and child rearing, if you could speak to that.
I mean, I do think one of the things that is happening is everyone's scrambling. And I think it's, you know, I certainly wouldn't say it's social workers. I would say it's the field of children's services. And what does it mean to have mandated reporters, right? So lots of different fields have mandated reporting. So teachers would have to report something if they saw it. You know, physicians, nurses, you know, yeah. So I think it's more the structure of there have been these rules and regulations that were put out there because we're trying to solve a problem we don't know how to get our arms around. And so I think that this is one of the negative outcomes that happens when we see this kind of situation just happening out of control, and folks are like, well, if it's trauma, then we got to stop people from spanking their kids. Well, we know that that's not the solution. That's not the problem, that it's much bigger than that. And when we have these incredibly complex you know, happenings, everyone I think is just trying to throw spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. And I think that that's just part of it. I know one of the things that our team does, they're very trauma focused. And part of that is working with the parents, working as much as we can to, you know, educate parents about where that line is and why maybe your son was behaving this way in the store and those kinds of things. So yes, so I think it's a complicated solution, and that most of us feel completely overwhelmed by and aren't quite sure how to handle it. There is, and I know that we're at time.
A few more minutes, because I've got another question back here, and I've got a couple questions and some announcements.
Awesome. And so what I would like to do is, after we wrap up, I wanted to show a video for those of you who can stay that really show some incredible hope and compassion kind of infused into a prison system. And if you can watch it without tearing up or getting choked up, I will be incredibly impressed. So let me know. But I know that a lot of you have to leave, but I wanted to show it anyway, just kind of after the fact.
Thank you, Stacy.
Yeah.
Dr. Dixon or Dr. McIntosh, or either one of you want to respond, Kevin?
Real quickly. It's interesting that you should raise up animals. They have a natural instinct for caring for others. And I always reflect back to the situation that happened at the Cincinnati Zoo, Harambe, the gorilla. When the little boy, when the mama wasn't paying attention, you know which child's going to climb over the barrier. You know what I mean? So when that child fell down there, you notice how that gorilla grabbed the child by the hand. It was almost protecting that child naturally, knowing that, you know, if you're not going to be watched, I'm going to watch you. And unfortunately, this situation happened where the animal was shot and killed. But it just had a natural instinct. And we have to get back to those natural instincts and trust that mother with, you know, as part of that process. 2 books I'm going to suggest that you read, and I'm sure most of you have read these. Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. You've got to read it if you haven't. And the other was What Happened to You with Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. It is amazing. That whole thing around trauma inform, and they do a wonderful job with that book. So just 2 resources there. Thank you. Isabel Wilkerson. Cast.
Okay.
Senator Miller, you have a question?
Just really quickly, I want to commend you and everybody who's here. Well, my question follows your question. I think it's an excellent question in that I don't see enough professional development being given to those who are the professionals within the organization. And unfortunately, they're not coming from the same place that all of you are coming from. I'm smiling underneath my mask at the community engagement that, you know, you're all continuing, that you've been doing for so many years. I'm mad at Kevin because he's really like 75 years old and he looks like he's 35 years old. Again, what is being done in the area of professional development for the professionals who are not engaged in the things that you are, don't even think that they should be, and they're kind of hanging with a group of people who do not know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
And let me add another component to it, because even the graduate course, I teach diversity and cultural competence. Yes, we bring in the Reverend Aarons and other folks that talk about that. But you have to understand, a lot of the social workers in my class, which are probably about 80% women, most of them come from outside Central Ohio. They're from the rural communities, so they've never been exposed to persons of color. Just like the police department, a lot of folks aren't from Central Ohio or not from Franklin County. So again, you've got to be intentional about how you train those individuals. Otherwise, they're not going to understand. But the thing is, it shouldn't be a cultural competence diversity training, a 2-hour training on implicit bias. It needs to be immersion. They need to actually have the experiential exercise of going to a Black church and sitting in there for a service to see how people interact, see how people show love. They need to be able to work in the community and learn from the community besides the book and academic, more structured classroom didactic kinds of training. So.
And I just want to share on that point, Senator Miller, it should be required of every profession that interacts with the community. Communities, plural, all racial, ethnic, and cultural communities, that they should be required to have cultural humility, cultural competence, cultural appropriate training if you touch or care for anybody. Because we can't know what we don't know. And all of us have biases. And many of the professions agree with that, including social work. That's why they brought in Kevin Dixon to talk about the appropriateness and understanding the cultures that you say you want to serve. If you don't know the racial, ethnic, and cultural communities, you can't very well appropriately serve those communities. And so some of us, while we were in public life, tried to pass legislation that would require cultural competence training on an ongoing basis, not one and done, not 1 2-hour course and you're done. As Dr. Dixon talked about, it's also about infusing cultural humility in the coursework to become a social worker, to become a physician, to become a psychologist or a nurse, or in this case, a police officer, a firefighter, because the public you serve doesn't necessarily come from the same race or ethnicity or culture, religion as you do. And so there are dynamics that you're going to make missteps and set up that divisiveness between community or individual and that professional. Certainly in education, children learn differently based on the culture they come from. And so if you don't understand and you're not willing to understand, you're going to make mistakes. So I think that's a first step. And as I said, it should be ongoing. It should be a certification process. As you get your license, you have to have so many hours, continuing education hours in cultural humility, so that it's ongoing. Cultures change over time and distance. Just like our Somali brothers and sisters that have been here for several generations, their culture is different than first generation Somalis, first generation Latinx communities, etc. So we've really got to take a look at this, and we've got to demand it because we're the public that all of these professions say they want to serve. And with that, we also have to have a workforce that reflects the racial, ethnic, and cultural communities that we're talking about. Those that are disproportionately being negatively impacted by all of these issues. And so with that, I want to highlight our 2021 Healthcare Justice Awards event. We're establishing a new scholarship fund for racial, ethnic, and underrepresented cultures who go into healthcare professions, plural, all the various professions. In a social work class, you are doing good if you have 2 African-American or persons of color in that social work.
The graduate level.
Yeah.
It's different, but
Yeah.
they leave.
They leave because they're snapped up into other professions. We don't have enough psychiatrists. Poor Dr. McIntosh is being pulled in every which way. She's been at 4 different institutions. She's doing multiple jobs right now with Fairfield and Albus. And if I could steal her, I would steal her, because we need African American, Latinx, Asian, Appalachian professionals that come from psychiatry, psychology, social work. And so that's why we're establishing this scholarship fund. All of the money raised, we're going to give scholarships to students who are going into these professions. Because if we don't do it, it won't be done. They'll just continue to weed people out or have them switch over to another profession. And we need them. We desperately need them. If we can't grow and groom our own, then shame on us. And so Primary One Health is establishing this fund so we can start grooming, growing, and training our own racial, ethnic, and cultural professionals who are going to take care of those who are suffering most. Our event, and I'm happy to announce the 2 awardees this year, our Healthcare Justice Awardees, our Councilwoman Priscilla Tyson, who is the Community Award recipient. And then our own, we always do an internal award recipient, our own Tina Vamos, who is the site manager at our South Parsons Avenue location in the John Maloney building. Tina has a heart of gold. She is so compassionate and so deserving of this award because she serves the homeless that come knocking on our doors on South High, those that are addicted to substances, those who have mental health challenges, and those who are just down on their luck. And so her peers selected her as the other award recipient. So we'd love to have you. It's November the 4th. We're doing a blended event. Tickets are on our website. You can go to our website and there are little cards on your table to learn more about the event. But again, we want to groom and grow and train our own so that we can have those professionals coming back to Primary One Health or other health institutions in our community. Do we have any questions online, Chris, before I?
No questions, but comments. Excellent forum. Thank you all for such an informative presentation. Looking forward to future learnings. Thank you for an outstanding event. Really appreciated hearing from all 3 speakers. And this was a great forum and discussion.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the viewing audience for sharing those comments. Kathleen.
One announcement.
Yes.
I just wanted to, the last time we had a meeting, I announced they were going to build this in edifice, but they have completed, and I'm embarrassed because I don't have the contact information, but you let me know where I can give it to you as a resource. They have completed the building on 17th, just north of Broad Street. This is a living quarters for children who have aged out of the foster system and who are engaged in college. They can live there at an extremely affordable price. So they can.
Thank you. We will make sure we send that out to everyone that's here today and then post it as well and send it to individuals that didn't come to the live presentation.
I can't think, I know they have a sign out for former foster, and I don't know if that's the name of the building. I'm kind of embarrassed, but it's I mean, boy, I lived there myself. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Good.
And it's right across the street from the town, the apartments that were built for individuals, especially single women with children who are enrolled in college. It's an affordable place to live, and they also have childcare down on the corner. I think everybody died for that.
Sure.
Anyway, so it's all on 17th. Both these programs on 17th, just north of Broad and just south of Long Street.
So that's 17th Street,
Yes.
north of Broad, south of Long.
Long, right, that area right there. But the building is absolutely fabulous, and to me, you know, we talk about human trafficking and stuff, and I think the foster system, you know, to take somebody 18 years old, just put them on the street, so anyway, but we're very happy to have that.
Wonderful. Yes, go right ahead.
My name is Natalie. My background is entitled Refugee Resettlement, and I'm from the Vietnamese community, and would like to take the opportunity
Oh, thank you very much. Well, thank you, Natalie, and thank you for all the work that you've done. We believe in helping the communities that need the help the most. And certainly our Vietnamese community went through some very difficult times in the early years. We now are having an influx of Afghani residents that are coming to the community. We should be as welcoming for them as we should be welcoming for all of our communities, our Bhutanese, Nepali, certainly our Somali, Latinx communities. Yes, Liban.
Yes, thank you very much again. I just want to take the opportunity to thank Kevin Dixon. I have known him last 20 years. I came here in 1998. I remember that I met him in 1998 in one senior service resource center. He was looking for a Somali contact. And I met him. From that day up to now, he is my mentor. He's a wonderful guy. And also, Shalira Tavares has been a great help for the Somali American community for the last 20 years. I just want to add one thing that she earlier said about the culture. I remember that 10 years ago, my father came from Somalia. He came here. I have a son, he's like 10 years old. Three of us, we are different generations. We call the Civil War generation, pre-Civil War generation, and post-Civil War generation. If you are the best doctor in the world, and come to me and tell me that I'm going to help your father, you can't help my father. Unless my father opens himself to you. However you have medicine, however you have the knowledge, the person must open himself. So I was very excited when Senator Miller and you guys were saying that we need professionals who come from within the professionals. And the reason that we're saying is, very minor example. A Somali person had an accident in his Cleveland Road. Any Somali who sees that accident, he stop his car and go to that accident. And the police was trained not to be close to each other. We come from a survival country, a country that you hide under the table because that person is not your tribe. So you have to hide from him. Or if you see somebody who's being killed somewhere, you say, oh, he might be the tribe I am, so I have to help him. We are the people who come from that. And the police here, American police, they're very excessive force, they use all that. And when you come close to it, they scare you and you have all those things. We are not trained that. We grew up a culture of helping one another. If you see your brother or someone being helped, regardless of you work with him. But here in America, it's very dangerous. So I just want to emphasize that the police, they need the CIT. They need the CIT because it's very important. Otherwise, they cannot assume everything they know. They have to learn from the people. So that's what I want to thank you.
Thank you, Liban. They need CIT, crisis intervention training, and they need cultural competence training as well. Because one without the other, they're not going to understand the nuances, as you said, of the Somali culture and how brothers and sisters come to each other's rescue. Because otherwise, there's deadly consequences. I want to thank everyone for coming out. Again, our event is November the 4th. It's at the Marriott. It's a blended event. You can either come to the event and be socially distanced, or you can drive by and pick up your lunch and watch it online. We're going to have both opportunities. November the 4th at the Marriott University Hotel on Olentangy River Road. It's from 11:30 until 1 p.m. And we have information on our website. You can go there and buy your tickets, tables, or sponsorship. So we really appreciate everyone being here today. We want to thank our speakers, certainly Dr. Sarah McIntosh, Dr. Kevin Dixon, and our own Stacy Swenson for their brilliance this morning. And really think about how each one of us, each one of you can help to change the dynamics in our community. I know we're all stressed. I know we're all dealing with the pandemic, but if we can help a child, if we can help a neighbor that's going through something worse than what we're going through, give them some direction on where they can go to get the services that they might need, that's a step in the right direction. We all have to do our part. And I thank you all for being here this morning. Get to know each other, help each other, help each other's communities, And God bless you. And I just want to do a pause for all the victims of the homicides of 153 and all of the families that are suffering, the communities that are suffering from their deaths. So if we could just give a pause. Thank you, and God bless each and every one of you, and have a wonderful weekend.
Yes.
Yeah, but this is the instructions on how to get through here. That's not right. Well, that's how. Yeah, yeah.